spend any time on X or on Substack reading the most thought-provoking essays from conservatives, you've probably encountered Richard Hanania. Richard is the author of the book, The Origins of Woke, which explains how civil rights law created the conditions for woke progressives to engage in ideological enforcement in schools and in the workplace. He is extremely critical of woke progressives, and during the pandemic he strongly denounced COVID overreaches like mask mandates and school closures. But Richard also has a lot of strident criticisms for conservatives. He writes that on average right-wing people are not as well informed as left-wing people, and has also authored a recent newsletter piece that I thought this audience would like to hear about. It's titled Why Americans Should Die for Ukraine, challenging prevailing wisdom on the right about the importance of U.S. involvement in that conflict. Richard Hanania joins me now to discuss that and much more, the election, politics, etc. Richard, I read a lot of what you write, and I find myself nodding along in agreement, sometimes vigorous agreement with like most of it, and then I'll read something that I totally disagree with, or even something that like offends me on a visceral level. That's probably a good trait for an intellectual, that I don't just like automatically agree with what you say, or I think it's worth reading even when I don't appreciate it. But you would, I think, concede that you have been lumped under a variety of ideological categories on the right broadly over the last few years. I think I knew you first as a kind of Iraq war critic, non-interventionist. I think that's what you were on Rising the first time to talk about. And then we were like very in sync on COVID stuff. But you're now more of like a liberal internationalist foreign policy person, but you're also libertarian on a lot of regulatory issues. So why don't you describe yourself for viewers who are thinking right now, who is this person and this doesn't make any sense?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on, Robbie. I am, I'm an independent writer, so I have the luxury of being able to say what I think and write what I want to write about and not be necessarily beholden to any line. And sometimes I can change my mind and I don't have to explain it. Well, I explain it to my readers, but I don't have to, explain it to some ideological movement or donors or something like that. But basically, if you just want sort of the summary of my politics, I'm a classical libertarian. I used to be, the big substantive change in my politics over the last 3 years or so has been on foreign policy. I've become more sympathetic towards liberal internationalism, less sympathetic towards restraint or isolationism. I haven't gone the full, sort of resistance, MSNBC, State Department line. In some ways, I go beyond them on certain issues on foreign policy. I think Trump's Middle Eastern policy, the Abraham Accords, I think was a huge success. So in some ways, I'm to the right of the foreign policy establishment. In some ways, I'm with them. But other than that, I'm basically a libertarian, classical liberal who's critical of both sides.
So what are your takeaways from the election? We just had with Trump winning massively. I think most reasonable people expected it was going to be close and either was capable of winning, and that is the case, but Trump happened to win by a lot more than many people expected. Republicans winning all over the place on I don't even on issues, on responses, on gut feelings that things are wrong with the economy and immigration and other such issues. Trump is going to have more of a free hand, I think, or he has fewer people in the Republican Party or in the prospective administration that are going to stop what he wants to do. We don't exactly know what he even wants to do on a variety of subjects, but he has this time around surrounded himself with a really unique set of ideological people, with former Democrats like RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, but then also Bill Ackman and Elon Musk. Will Elon Musk be the actual president of this country, with Trump just kind of operating as the front man or the spokesperson for the tech right agenda?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a couple ways of looking at this Trump victory, and it's quite remarkable. I mean, first of all, I think just we have to sort of from a historical perspective and sort of from a perspective of historical causation, just acknowledge Trump's unique appeal. I was looking at the results that, the Mark Robinson scandal, and Mark Robinson lost by 10, 15 points because, of course he did. He had this scandal where he was on this pornographic website and talking about all kinds of weird things. Carrie Lake is another kind of person who, lost by a comfortable amount in Arizona. And like these people, Trump has a lot of the flaws. I mean, he's an election denier like Carrie Lake. He says crazy things, including things that, arguably are bragging about assaulting sexually assaulting women, but it doesn't harm him. So I think there's just like, first of all, we have to have acknowledgement that this is a unique kind of historical figure with a unique appeal. And as for his victory, there's two ways to look at it. So the tech right, this is something that I wrote about last year. It was the emergence of these people in Silicon Valley. I was thinking about Mark Andreessen, lesser extent Elon Musk. I mean, he had bought Twitter at that point. He hadn't gone all in on Trump yet. So you have these influences. And these are generally pro-market libertarianish people, but at the same time, you have like these leftists like RFK and Tulsi Gabbard, and even Vance, who is lumped in with the tech right, but is also says a lot of stuff that's friendly to economic populism. So one of these sides, there's a kind of tension here. I think that probably I'm optimistic in the sense that I think the classical liberals, libertarians are probably going to get their way because that's where the GOP establishment is. I don't think RFK and Tulsi Gabbard are going to be as influential on policy as, say, Elon Musk or Peter Thiel or somebody like Peter Thiel is going to be. But it's going to be an interesting tension. It's going to be interesting to watch. And then, so that's like the elite level. And then you could look at the level of sort of the mass public. And the story here is the Hispanic vote. I mean, it's a 25-point shift over one election cycle. Democrats went from winning 33 points, according to the NBC exit poll, to winning by 8 points this time. So 25-point shift in one election cycle, with the same candidate on the ballot. This is also sort of remarkable. I wrote an essay the other day about how this sort of discredits both the left and the right in their sort of demographic, determinism. We used to hear a lot about this during the days of the Obama coalition. They told us about the browning of America. This was something liberals, took seriously and were sort of optimistic about. Maybe Republicans could squeeze out one or two more elections, but then we're on a path to a permanent majority. And then Republicans started to believe it, and people like Tucker Carlson, like Ed Coulter, were saying, okay, we have to keep the country white because, as liberals tell us, it's going to be a less white country, so Republicans will never be able to win an election again. And as it turned out, Hispanics are basically, if you could shift people to 25 percentage points in one election cycle, like you'd be foolish to be making predictions 20, 30 years down the line, generationally. Also, Trump's success, the other part of the demographic momentum was about the idea that young people in general were moving to the left. And we've seen, a shift in the other direction too. So I think that there's just it's a huge victory for Trump, for the Trump movement, and also like a blow against this demographic determinism, which I think is unhealthy for both sides. It's unhealthy when the left sits there and say, we're going to become less white, therefore we're going to win. And it's unhealthy when conservatives sit there and say, we need to restrict immigration because we're getting replaced. So that's something that makes me optimistic.
We're going to talk a lot more about that coming up next. Stay with us. More Rising in just a minute.